Okay, let's get this show on the road. Welcome everybody. Been a little unwell past week or so. But this is going to be more of a focused stream to try and go over everybody's homework. I set it to sub only, so not many people are going to be able to see this live. That's the intention. I want to keep everything on a video format so I can just focus on what I'm doing, just keep the amount of stimulus kind of minimum so I can actually get through my stream. So let's actually get right into it. Let's not waste any time. First submission by Para on the Discord. Go ahead and pull up your work. Alrighty, that is Para's work. Are there any associated comments with the work? Let me check Discord. Para says, feedback welcome from anybody, nothing in particular, so we can just go over this a bit more generally, I guess. Let's take off one of my earphones here. Alright, much more comfortable. Lower the music in case that's too loud. This sounds a little bit loud in my ear, just so we can get comfortable here. Okay, that should be at a manageable level. So, what are we gonna do here? The objective, just to kind of review for everybody, is that I asked you guys to pick a reference, to break it down in line into basic shapes, and then to render it out with the overall goal of clarity. Let's see how you did. So, pick the rabbit here, not too bad of a reference, breaking it down into basic shapes. So we'll talk about the breakdown first. I have a couple of questionable things here that I want to sort of bring up to you. The first one is that you're breaking down this front plane into this sort of disc shape, and you know what, I'm not completely opposed to that, but maybe in the future what I would maybe like to see over here is something a little bit more accurate to the reference. Because this whole plane, just because it's like a muscular plane, it's way more flat than you might think, so I'm gonna just draw it up for you. Pencil. So I would kind of expect this, just like because this obviously, if you go into the anatomy of it, right? So the elbow is right over there. Goes into the wrist, is right over there. So you have all of these muscles activated over here, right? And this over here is the shoulder. So knowing that, right, this whole thing kind of breaks down a little bit differently, because you realize that this area and this area are now the upper arm and basically the lower arm, right? The forearm of this bunny rabbit here. So these shapes tend to be a little bit flatter than you might think. So as opposed to having it kind of plume outward, I think I would maybe like to see this whole situation be resolved in terms of maybe some slightly flatter shapes. So in this particular case, I think something like this would be a bit more appropriate. Having the leg kind of be separated out. I'm gonna draw through for you. So I think that maybe would be a little bit more accurate to what I'm seeing, and the same thing on the other side. Of course, the shape goes through over here. I think that might be a little bit more accurate to what we're kind of dealing with here. Now, I'm not going to critique the breakdown a little bit, just the analysis I feel like can lead to a better painting, because obviously if I was to kind of convert this breakdown into that final product, it might lead to some shadow shapes that don't actually exist. Now, I think that particular idea there, the hemispherical idea, it does work, but it's a little bit higher than you've placed it, because you can just take the shoulder of the rabbit, which is right there. The shoulder could be considered to be something of that kind of shape, right? But the entire front plane, because ultimately, like, what are we trying to do here, right? We're trying to break something down so that we can paint it. So the breakdown happens to matter a lot, because if you break it down like this and then you paint it, well, it's not going to look the way you expect, because, well, this breakdown doesn't really represent what you see on the reference, right? So be a little bit careful about that in the future. So kind of just break it down this one level further. I feel like don't be hesitant to simplify too too much, I think. We can add a couple more shapes there, and overall get a better picture of what that arm's all about. Some more notes about the breakdown. Excuse me, I need to sneeze. Alright, so a couple more notes about that breakdown. Overall perspective of the ear, yeah, I don't think that's bad. Maybe the shape of it could be adjusted slightly, but beyond that, I think things are fairly straightforward. That can be okay. The body, like this back leg, I think is pretty good. That's pretty successful. I don't mind that breakdown. The front leg, again, it's not super representative of what you're seeing. I think you have a way closer over here, and then you oversimplified it to a hemisphere. Try not to do that, because again, remember what the overall goal here is, right? To finish this painting. That's it for the breakdown. I think your perspective is alright. I think everything looks pretty grounded. Let's get into the painting phase of this, right? So what have you done for the painting? Overall, I feel like a lot of the stuff is pretty solid. Not too many complaints there. Some of these cast shadows are a little bit questionable, right over there. Like, I like the design of it, I think it looks cool. Whether or not it's accurate to, you know, what we see over here, that kind of falls into a little bit of a question, but I think the idea here is that you're casting this across the face, and then you're casting this against the side. I don't think I have too many complaints about it, beyond the fact that I wish that there was more of a break here. Because remember, if the shadow's casting over a plane break, then this line over here has to represent this plane's interaction with the shadow. And because it's so severe in terms of like the way it is positioned, right? So it's a super angular bend. I kind of expect the shadow to bend in an equivalent manner, right? Because it's just so incredibly angled. Because I'm assuming that your idea for the face from the side view would be something like this, right? Draw a box like that, and then maybe side view doesn't tell us too much. No problem, John. Okay, so I'm assuming you have the idea that you have a face like that. Right, so it's almost like we're looking at a cube here to a certain extent. So we have these super opposite kind of facing sides. So you assume the shadow on them would be a little bit more different than the way you have it. Okay, so beyond that, what do I have issues with here? I think a couple of things could do with a little bit of tightening up, but overall, like the overall result is pretty okay. I actually don't mind the overall result. The major thing that's not taking me away from this piece is perhaps this whole area over here, because I feel like, we'll talk about the stuff that you did pretty well here. I think this cylinder over here is pretty successful, not too bad. Maybe a little bit of specular highlighting on this side, so we'll go with the good first. I think right over here, maybe just a touch of specular will round that up even more. In fact, I think the entire piece could do with a little bit of specular. Right? Let's actually go over the entire piece and do a little bit of spec highlighting, and see what that does for us. Of course, the specular highlighting has to be gradiented, right? So maybe I'll do this in a new layer just to drive that point home. But again, this little side over here could be highlighted, just a little bit of a finishing idea. And remember, this matters a lot, right? This matters a lot for your own drawings, for your own paintings, because missing this specular is missing this free idea of sharpness, it's missing this free idea of detail, and it really adds a lot to the drawing, right? I mean, like I said, a lot of this stuff transcends just drawing shape, because it's basically a major step in the process that can be easily overlooked. And you'll see all the time when I crit people, even at a very high level, right? Summerins comes to mind. Summerins is a very good painter, and he gave me a couple of pieces to crit the other day. And this is one of the things that I showed him that he could easily do to increase the quality of his work, right? Just add those speculars. Because again, it's one of those kind of pushing final ideas that really take a painting to the next level, right? So these things over here, right? Even though I'm doing them quite quickly and it might come off as a little bit tacky, the idea is that it is a free area through which you can kind of exploit and get more roundness, more of a read, more of a visual interest, and it's not being done to too high of a degree right now. So we can go ahead through the entire piece and add this variation, and it really tends to overall elevate the quality of what we're looking at, right? It overall tends to improve what we're looking at, because again, you're now operating in the full realm of value, the full realm of what value can kind of offer you. So all this stuff over here, I feel like, is a super valuable thing to add. Now, I got nothing against drawing matte objects, right? Nothing wrong with that. But again, if you want to kind of make this look as good as possible, and since there was no really strong stipulation for it to be matte, I think just a little bit of a specular. No, we're not going crazy here and adding a ton of gloss, but just a little bit of specular like this, I think we can allow that as a provision. And then as a byproduct, right, in your own illustration work or your own painting work, this can be a good hint towards things that can oftentimes be overlooked. Okay, so just a little bit of specular here and there really adds a lot to the entire painting, I feel like. So don't neglect that final step. It's one of those biggest kind of finishing things that offers you a free area of sharpness. So stuff like that I feel like is quite warranted, and it does help a lot, right? So even a little bit of a change has a rather dramatic effect on the painting. So we went from that to that. Well, some of that was already painted on, but you get the idea. So I think up here we're having a little bit of an issue, a few problems over here with the overall read. So we're gonna address that right now. I think first and foremost, some of these shapes over here, especially like the backside of this shape over here, even though the shape looks really solid, this one, the neck kind of truncated cone, we're missing some contrast there, right? So, because this is now bleeding into that, and this stuff really costs you a lot, right? Even though it's a small thing, it really does help to kind of shore up these kind of gaps, just because of the idea that it just lends a lot to the overall clarity. Also, I feel like this shape that's been kind of co-opted to represent the upper torso of the rabbit, I feel like that whole shape seems to have been like kind of lost. Like I think you had an idea for it, and then it went somewhere else, because I can't really tell how any of this is placed, which is kind of throwing me a little bit. I feel like the idea over here was to have it be like this semi-spherical, it's not semi-hemispherical object, right? I think that was the idea, but now I feel like it's gone a little bit flatter than I would like. So maybe a little bit of clarity on those shapes would be a little bit better. Hold on, I'm trying to figure out what happened to my music. Okay, the music's still playing, it's just that I can't hear it. My ears are malfunctioning. So what was I talking about? Yeah, so I'm not sure exactly what happened to this shape. I feel like it's there somewhere, but I can't quite find it, because you have to realize there's a little bit of like visual question marks as far as what's even happening over here, because if I draw the profile view of that, I'm assuming I'm gonna have this kind of ovally egg shape right over there, right? So I have this egg shape, and I have these hemispherical things in the front, so we'll just draw one of them right over there. And then this thing over here, right, the way that it's angled, it sort of betrays the contour of this, because it's angled so much to the fact that it almost seems like there's a dent in the front of this object. Well, I think what you want to do is to put it here, right? To put it on top, the way that it's drawn. But that doesn't seem like where we positioned for the rabbit, right? I feel like it's a little bit too front. Placed a little bit too much towards the anterior. So I think your idea initially was correct. The idea that let's truncate this whole thing like that, and then we'll just place this on top of this, but that's not what you rendered. So be a bit clearer about that, I think. Clarify it in your drawing if you want. This is why I always say draw through if you can. So draw through, meaning draw all of the sides so you actually know what's happening. And I think that's going to benefit the drawing process over, because I think this makes more sense, and this is what I think I evaluate from your line drawing, which is, and thank you for including it by the way, that's why I asked you to include it. But that's not what's been painted over here, right? So clarify this, because I know that if I ask you to, you'll paint that shape, but I feel like somewhere along the line we lost the idea of what this was actually supposed to be, and that cost us a lot. Even if this was just a simple square or a cube, I feel like that would benefit us a bit more than what's actually happening over here. A couple of slight perspective issues maybe with this one over here. I know that you said previously that you had some problem with cylinders. Not too many problems, I don't feel like. Like this one's okay, not too bad. This one's also pretty okay, maybe a little bit too dark on that side. This is a half cylinder, very okay, not too bad. Maybe a bit more contrast towards the core shadow would be nice, just a little bit more, just to kind of get that roundness if you want. because right now we're not super halfway to black between the shadow and light here. Contrast could, I think, be improved there. Also, don't be afraid of doing something like this. It's very fine to go ahead and play around with your contrast once you're done. So if I hit this with an auto contrast, a lot of the stuff actually gets improved. Like, while I disagree with the overall result, right? I think this particular shape over here, maybe not this area on the side, but definitely the actual body of the cylinder, that gets the contrast that I actually look for. Right? So now it actually automatically halfways to black it, which is interesting, right? Because that's what we talk about all the time, and that's what the computer has decided is good contrast. So stuff like that can kind of help you verify where things are supposed to stand. Couple more things that we can talk about. Maybe pay a little bit more attention to the softness of the shadow. It is going to help a lot. I feel like a lot of ambiguity in this piece kind of stems from the way that you broke down this this front torso. So if you want to like just change this portion and just like redo it for yourself, I think that would be a great idea. Just redesign this portion and redraw it, because right now I think a lot of the ambiguity, because I think this is pretty good, right? I think the head is pretty solid. I feel like you know this as well. I just think the this area over here, something in the design phase was missing. So maybe clarify a bit more on that stage. Draw through. You see, I draw through most of the time when I'm doing something. I draw all of the. So I keep saying draw through. Right? What do I mean? I mean that I'm drawing all of the sides or something, right? So when I design this whole object, whatever it might be, right, I don't leave it kind of ambiguous. So if I was gonna draw a square here, I would draw a square in perspective like that. I'd push the perspective that way, and then I'd draw the square down here. That way I know what's happening on all of the sides. It's just a good practice to do because it keeps you sharp on perspective. Right? So if that's gonna be my square, then it tells me a lot of stuff about what needs to go around, because now that I see both sides, I can accurately say, okay, what is the front plane, what is the side plane, and where do things need to be positioned. So from here, for example, so now that I have my outside edges here, then from here I could say, okay, I'm gonna place the leg on this side, for example. I have that option. I can place the legs on both sides. Now, I'm not saying this is accurate to your reference, but this is just a guideline to go on. Also, I feel like this one's a little bit of a cop-out, though it is facing directly to us, so more power to you, I guess. It's fine. I just don't think that 1 point is good practice right now, because I think your 1 point's fine. Your 2 points almost there, by the way. I think it's not far off. Your perspective is not bad. So you hit the contact shadow, helps a lot. A couple of things I want to point out with the shadow itself to make them look more natural. I think we could easily add a little bit more darkness in the mask of the shadow, just because we need to handle a bit more ambient occlusion ideas. So that could be done, right? I like this blurriness over there. That's good attention to detail. Some of the stuff here, so like this foot is completely in shadow, but I have this weird kind of light coming out of it. So maybe a little bit of clarity there. Even though this could very well be accurate, I don't think it is, but it could be. I feel like we could have a little bit more clarity on what's happening over here, so either have everything in shadow and then light it through ambient light or bounce light, or have everything in light and then have a clear cast shadow on top. But right now we have this visual kind of disparity here that is not serving anybody, so be a little bit careful about that. Lastly, over here, I think we could think a little bit more about ambient occlusion. When you have interaction over here, interaction of one object on top of another object, just think about the fact that because these two things are so close to each other, but they're not joined, remember? And even if they were joined, there would be a bit of bounce light there. But think about the fact that there's going to be a bit of ambient occlusion. So this whole area over here, right? And this applies to whenever, and again, that's what I talk about when I talk about these kind of paintings. This applies to all of your work, right? All of your work is going to have this. Is that when you have two objects close to each other, we're going to assume there to be a little bit of ambient occlusion there. So how you do it's up to you. I like to use the tip of my airbrush. Just to add a little bit more separation there. And then you can throw an edge there if you'd like. But this stuff tends to really help out, right? Be it an ambient occlusion or be it a contact shadow or be it whatever. That stuff really helps to separate stuff out, which is the point here. Right, because it's not just the cast shadow that does things, it's also the ambient occlusion, right? When things are closer to other things, I do expect there to be a little bit more darkness. And you do understand this concept, right? Because you got it right over there, and you got it right over here. So remember to get it right over here, consistency. Okay? Beyond that, some things are looking a little bit flat, and I think it could just be avoided by being a little bit more careful with your values. Like this one over here, it's almost there, it's getting there. I feel like the drawing overall is kind of betraying you. Maybe if you draw it a little bit more rounder, that could help over there. Let me just use my warp tool. I think that would help a little bit. A lot of the drawing is what's going to influence the way things are perceived. This one's actually okay. I think this is more of a value problem with the way that it's seeming a little bit flat. But now that I'm gonna reevaluate things from a distance, I think that just might be my eyes playing tricks on me. I think that one's okay. Remember, a bit more bounce light here, okay? It does help. It's a free idea to add more roundness, so do take it when you can. Be a little bit careful about your edges. Some of these are getting a little bit muddy. This one's pretty good, not bad. But otherwise, I think we're looking at a pretty decent rendering. So good job, man. As far as rating goes, out of a 10, I think I give this one a 6. Pretty good. Try and make the changes that we talked about, right? And if you need to resubmit, you can resubmit. I'll look at it again for you. But thank you for submitting. We'll move on to the next one. How's it going, Innerglow? The next one is by Estonian. Okay, pretty cool. Let's look at that right now. Okay, nice work, man. So let's go over it from the beginning. Pretty good perspective. I don't have too many issues with that. I do have slight issues with the way that you've broken this down. I'm not sure if it's an active decision to stylize the legs to be that thick compared to the reference. I don't mind it. I think it doesn't look too bad. Some of the perspective I feel like maybe a little bit tilted compared to the ref. That just might be the fact that you're not drawing center lines, which is throwing me off, because I don't mind the final result of the final result. So yeah, not too bad. I don't have too many things to say about your breakdown. Everything seems to be in pretty much good order. It's curious that you put highlights in just these areas but not all of the shapes. I might have some slight problems with that in terms of consistency of line work, but overall I think that's pretty good. I don't have too many problems with that. So let's look at the painting itself. I like to include the breakdown, that's cool. So a couple of things to worry about here, right? So first of all, it's a pretty good job. I think a lot of this stuff is pretty satisfying to look at, especially this whole area over here I think is handled quite well. But let's talk about some higher level things that you're kind of missing here. So the first thing is clarity. So you do remember that this thing is an entire package, right? So everything is a package that we do. Some things over here are getting a little bit too close to that background value, and that's sort of screwing our read a little bit. So case in point, I'll mark them for you. So right over there is a problem, right over there is a problem. That one's okay. This one over here, not too bad. I feel like I've looked at this before and I found a couple more. But right over there and there, we'll just leave it at that for the time being. But these two, maybe even this to a certain degree, are values that are very close to that background value. So therefore, we are diminishing the overall clarity of our image. And this really matters, by the way, because when you look at a finished illustration, you don't want to accidentally lose part of your design, right? So if the goal here is to have it be clear, right, and that is the goal with these kind of paintings. And even if it isn't, right, since there was no clear stipulation, it's very possible that this could have been accidental. So we don't want that to happen. So be a little bit aware of that and manipulate your fundamentals to ensure that this stuff doesn't get too lost into the background, right? So whatever you need to do, you do it. So if for example, you could just easily go ahead and just add more darkness to that plane, just a tad bit more, and then suddenly instantly things become a little bit more clear, right? Suddenly things become a little bit more solid as opposed to it sort of melding into the background. Beyond that, I think ambient occlusion could be worried about a little bit more. There's some things in here that I quite like, for example, including a little bit of bounce light there. That's not too bad. But over here, for example, I feel like the ambient could be increased, mainly because these flats over here, right, they tend to look a little bit underworked, especially this stuff over here. Now I kind of understand the logic behind this, because you're not painting this the way that I sort of stipulated it, because you know, I would also do this in illustration, right? I would draw a connected shadow shape. I want you to consider, however, for this exercise or exercises like this, consider having the shapes be very clear in terms of what they are. So this side, this plane over here, and this plane over there, I want you to consider having some sort of visual separation between the two of them, even though it might not make all that much sense when it comes to the way that we're going to diagnose the painting and transfer it into value. So obviously we want to connect these two shapes, saying that this is going to be in darkness, this is going to be in darkness, right? But I want you to exercise the ability as us as artists to separate things if we need to. So add more bounce light if you need to, add more AO if you need to, or lighten up this face if you need to. Whatever you need to do and justify it on the canvas, that's a great exercise to do, because you don't ever want to kind of fall into this idea that, okay, these are going to be similar values, so let's just abandon it entirely. So one of the reasons why I stress clarity for these assignments is not just painting things accurately, but painting things the way you want to look. And clarity is just a simple idea, right? It's a simple idea that I want to see all faces. So when you cloud things like this, it's a good question to ask yourself, right? So the question to ask yourself is, while I know this might be accurate to reality, what happens if I need to show these faces in my own paintings? So can I manipulate the fundamentals to the fact that I don't alert people to the fact that it doesn't look unrealistic? But at the same time, am I able to manipulate it in such a way that things are still clear, right? Things are still clear. I get what I want without disrupting reality. So that's the big idea over here. So I think that overall could be improved, because really sometimes it's being pushed a little bit too much, I feel like, to the point where areas like this, areas like that, areas like this seem a little bit underworked, right? They seem underworked, which really kind of push them into my vision and make this look a little bit less solid than I think I would like, right? So be a little bit careful about that. One of the principles of industrial rendering, as stipulated by Craig Mullins, is the idea that we want to gradiate across all surfaces. And sort of a piggybacked idea on top of that is the idea that we really want to think about introducing gradation even when we ourselves don't think that any should exist. So over here, for example, you could add bounce light, you could add lights tangentially from the background, from ambient lights, or from background secondary light sources. There's a lot of things to give you an excuse. Because if you look at the quality of like this, for example, looks super round, right? There's a pretty good job on that one. Same thing over here, it looks pretty solid. But then you compare that to something like this in the background, and that just looks underworked, and it doesn't look like it fits along with the overall package. So be a little bit careful about that stuff. Your shadows as well, I think, like, could be a little bit more improved. First off, I don't know if this cast shadow is even accurate. We can go over casting shadows. It just creates a little bit of visual dissonance to me to see a shadow like this for something like this, or something that casted like that. So I do have a little bit of problem with that. So do consider being a little bit more. You can be simple with it, I don't mind. Like, just have simple ideas of casting vertically downwards, and that's fine. But try and make it a bit more accurate to the reference, and realize that your shadows are not going to be solid black all throughout. There's going to be way more ambient light filtering into this underside of the leg over here than there is going to be over here. So the big question mark is that why is this going to be the same value as this, even though they have dramatically different lighting conditions, right? So there's going to be way more light under here than over here, right? I do see some note towards the ambient done over here. I think be a little bit more consistent about that and fall off a little bit more. For example, there's no reason that this raised leg over here is going to cast a shadow that's this dark. It's just not possible. So be a little bit aware of that. It does help the overall package. Just because your rendering is so good over here, all of this stuff starts to really egg onto my attention because it just doesn't look like it belongs. Lastly, the last thing I want to talk to you about here is the idea that it doesn't look like it sits properly onto the canvas, and I think it's because you're missing a little bit of contact shadow. I think that's going to help a long way in making this stuff sit properly. So first of all, cast the shadows a little bit better. I feel like it's going to help a lot. So when you have kind of blurry lighter shadows going into slightly darker shadows over here, it's going to help a lot to kind of sell the image. And even more than that, I feel like this going through the whole process of adding a bit more contact ideas, like slight little occlusions underneath the points of contact, that stuff goes a long way. Add it right over there maybe, and then push this forward, and then make this darker, even though everything should be lighter. We'll just make everything lighter instead. Lighter over here. an idea, right? Make that lighter, and then make it darker as we progress closer and closer. Object. That stuff already helps a lot, right? Already we're getting a bit more grounding. And then at the very end, as a finishing touch, we can kind of add a little bit of contact shadow there to really ground this stuff, to prevent it from looking like it floats on top. Now the way that you kind of handle that contact's up to you, right? Where you want to select the point of contact and how you want to deal with that contact shadow, because I feel like you can deal with it. I feel like your fundamentals are pretty strong there, but I think that idea is ignored entirely there. Also, cast shadow over there is missing. Final point I feel like that I think could be improved a little bit here is that consider this this highlight here is not going to be uniform. So just as an idea to improve the naturalness of the piece, and you've done it in a few areas over here. So I think this consistency is something that I would kind of bring to your attention. But do consider the fact that this highlight's not going to be uniform all throughout. So it does kind of help the overall idea that this highlight does gradient from either side or from one side, whatever have you. Depends on how you consider your light source. But this stuff again kind of helps a little bit towards finishing your entire piece. And like that stuff just looks straight unfinished. A bit of consistency there. But otherwise decent fundamentals, just be consistent throughout the piece. Pretty good though, overall. I give this one an 8. Alright, go to the next one. We have one from Mr. Random Knees, okay. Associated comment. Take a drink here. I have the line work in file. Okay. Let's see what we can do here. Line work file. Painting. Okay, let's read the associated comment. You can see a lot of flaws. This is what I can do. I have the most issues with my sketch. I don't know how to simplify an animal into super basic shapes. My lack of perspective knowledge also doesn't help. So I think that's my biggest issue. So we can talk about that, sure. Let's not go into this right now in the painting. We'll talk about the drawing a bit more. Let's try drawing over your reference. So overall, I do agree with your assessment. I feel like I don't see that reference within this this breakdown of it. First of all, I don't really mind you tracing over the image because it's a breakdown, right? So you're learning a lot from it. So that's what I'm going to do to demonstrate. So I'm just going to straight draw over this. And I'll kind of walk you through the process that I personally think about when I'm breaking things like this down, okay? So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to look at what I'm seeing, right, in my reference. And I'm going to try and figure out what is a shape, what is a three-dimensional shape that's most best going to represent what I'm looking at. Right? And once I make that conclusion, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out landmark points on whatever I'm looking at to help me adjust for the orientation of said object. So we'll go over that with all of these ideas over here. So a very simple one over here is just this claw, right? I can infer what this claw is. I can just say it's a long triangle, right? So can I just draw a few long triangles along triangular prism shapes, right? So stuff like this, basically. If I draw through, it looks like this. I do encourage you to draw through. So same thing from a little bit more towards the front would look like this. So I understand how to draw this from multiple angles, right? And I say that that thing looks like this because it reminds me of it. But I could also say it looks like a cone, and we'll go over that as well. It could also be a complex shape as well, also possible. But let's just assume that we say that this particular idea, this particular claw, right, the front claw, let's just say that that's going to be a shape like this, a triangular prism. So let's go ahead and start marking out where we think certain things are going to go based on that assumption that it is going to be a triangular prism. Okay, so the first thing, and I think one of the most important things to identify when you're breaking things down into shapes, is you identify the center line. Okay, and the center line over here is quite clear to me, right? Center line just runs over. You know, something that's a bit more visible here on the canvas. Consider like a bright green maybe. So the center line over here is just running across the crest of that claw, right? So how do I know that's a center line? Center line is just, it's a line of symmetry, right? It's a line that divides something into two symmetrical halves for the most part. And just about everything that we see in nature is to some degree symmetrical, as long as you can find the axis of symmetry, right? So that little line over there, kind of line over there corresponds to this line over here for our triangular prism, right? Because these halves are symmetrical across both sides. So if I know one side, then I know the other side. And this sort of information is invaluable for perspective, because all that means is that if I say that I have a line over here, then I kind of understand where that line is going to be in perspective just based on what the center line is, right? I can understand that already inferred through what I'm looking at. So center line first, right? And then I look at some reference points, right? Based on just the geometry of stuff. So now that if I can find out, or if I can say that this particular line, if I just draw a line across there in that angle, I also know where that line is going to be on the other side, right? It's going to be like this. Because again, it's symmetrical across this within perspective. And then I can just complete the drawing like that. And then I get a well-formed claw in perspective that represents what I'm seeing in my reference, right? A similar idea to this, I can say the center line is beneath this, so beneath there and underneath. I can also see the center lines on top here, right? Because you can kind of draw multiple lines of symmetry. If it's on top, I can equate this whole area to a flat region, like that. Right? And I can say that this is going to be straight up like that, which means that the other side, because it's symmetrical, is also like that. I can close off that gap if I'd like. And then I can just draw these connecting lines. And now I get this claw, this whole claw in perspective. Similar idea to this, right? What can I consider this upper region to be? We can say that that's going to be a squished cylinder, for example. I know what a squished cylinder looks like. It looks like this. Right? The cylinder looks like this, so a squished cylinder is going to look just a little bit squished. So again, it's more for cylinders and for curved objects. Finding the major and minor axis can be really important to figure out where things are pointing. So just in case that's not super clear, for a cylindrical form, that's the major axis, and this is the minor axis. Major goes through and minor goes across. So the major axis is going to help you orient this whole surface. So did you have problems with that? Yeah, I think in this one of the biggest things that I'm seeing you do wrong is that you're not really drawing three-dimensional shapes, right? You're kind of just outlining stuff, but I don't see you draw too many shapes. I don't see a single kind of shape that reminds me of what I just did, right? So draw through. That's my biggest piece of advice for you. It's going to really help you with perspective. Try your best to draw through stuff, and I want to see you draw through on your sketches from now on. It's really going to help you, because draw through forces you to think about stuff in perspective. If you can't draw through, that just means that you spend more time practicing basic shapes from different angles until you can kind of see things, until you can kind of conclude where things are going to be in perspective. So I would advise that if you're having difficulty drawing through, just start drawing basic shapes. You can draw basic shapes over certain things. You can just construct your own basic shapes and start to rotate them around. Just play around with things in perspective a bit more until you get more used to seeing things like this, right? But I don't think it requires all that much training. In fact, you could just start right over here, right? You can just start drawing over references, and then just try and see how much you can confirm from that particular reference using your technique. So again, draw through is a big one over here. Do not exclude it. Foreshortening's on the big one, but I don't do too much foreshortening when I do these kind of drawings, because things are usually in different angles. But I can if I need to. It's not a big deal. But draw through is a big one over here. Don't exclude it. So draw through and centerline are going to be your bread and butter when it comes to these particular things. Again, so how do I analyze this? There are landmarks all over the place. I see this curvature there, so I can kind of piggyback off that curvature. I have that curved form over there. I know it curves around, but I'm just going to simplify it. I'll just say that the major axis over here is going to be just like that. I'm going to curve this around the back end, and then I just draw through both sides. I just connect them up, and I get this nice looking 3D shape, right? This 3D shape that is solid. That's a solid 3D shape, and it's solid because of the fact that I'm drawing through. Right, so this whole thing, what I just did, it's a really solid shape, and it kind of withstands analysis just because we kind of went methodically through everything, right? And it all started with finding the center line and then drawing through whenever possible, right? Same thing for the top here. I mean, things are a little bit misoriented, I feel like, on the top, but again, same procedure, right? Find that center line, which is right over there. It's going to tell you a lot about what's happening, right? It also tells you that basically the perspective that this whole thing is looking at, because you could consider this to be the center line of maybe a giant cube or a sphere or a hemisphere or a disc shape, whatever. It doesn't matter, but it tells you a lot about what you're looking at. Just find out what the axis of symmetry is, find out what the center line is, and it's going to help you a lot. Okay, so if I know that, for example, then I know that, for example, this over here is probably going to be the minor, because it's symmetrical across this as well, and that's already giving me a lot of information about the way that this particular thing is positioned. So then if I just draw a hemisphere, if I draw a square, if I draw anything, everything's still going to be maintained in a perspective. That, but like that. I can just connect these two areas over there. This will probably be related to center line, like this and like this. End up having a lot more of a solid shape at the end of the day. Again, I would still draw through here to kind of confirm my perspective. Some of this looks a little bit wonky because I'm following reference too much. I wouldn't do this generally because I don't usually draw on reference. But that's the idea. So let me just do that again, I'll do it better. That goes here. So these three lines, basically, because it's the same object, you assume that they're going to be related. That. And if at all this is a problem, then just simplify a little bit more. You're going to give you your answer. And that needs to follow that because it's a solid shape. Draw a straight line over there. The straight line is related to this straight line. They're going to be the same. Again, it's drawn in 2-point perspective. Here. That here, bring that there. Back. Again, this one is a lot more solid. Again, these vertical lines are obviously going to be all the same because it's 2-point. I'm sorry, it's just 2-point, so verticals don't get distorted. That's that whole crab body there. In perspective. Okay? Same ideas for things like this, please draw through. So I find the center line, which also happens to be a line that's parallel to my major axis if I want to consider it in that particular fashion. And if I draw a line here, I have to draw the same line in perspective on the other side, right over there, right? So it creates this network of solid shapes that I can start using. That's like a super accurate shape for my drawing. right? But I would just much prefer to just simplify that into just a basic cylindrical form, so I can find out what that cylinder should be or how it should be facing based on this landmark over here. So I can't see all that much of the front of this object, but I do know it's cylindrical just because I know crabs, right? So I can say that that's going to be a super distorted in perspective cylinder. I can assume the same thing back here. I can connect the two of them. And that tells me what I'm looking at over there, right? So this larger shape in the front, in the foreground. Again, there are little hints all over the place, look for them. For example, I can see a lot of that forelimb over there, so I'm going to assume that I can see just about that much or a bit more if I draw through. And if I need to confirm stuff, I just look for the center line again. I would say the center line over here is going to be right about there, which means that if I draw a circle right over there, it needs to be pushed in perspective right over there on the other side. Right, so if I draw that, then this is going to be one side of it. I'm drawing this a bit too close to the reference here. Let me just make it a bit more simple, just because I don't want to be drawing exactly what's in the reference, because that kind of defeats the purpose. So it would be like this instead. Going through would be that. Obviously you would draw through first if you were unsure. And the front face is obviously, that's the front face there. That would be that front limb. Okay. And the same idea for the back limb here. I see a landmark point, that's a front face, so my front face of my cylinder is going to be right over there. Then I find the back face, and if I need any help, I just draw the center line. I think a question that might easily pop up in your mind for these kind of things is, how do I know which way to foreshorten? Because if I just have a center line, and if I have an object there, right? If I have a curve there, then how do I know to put another curve like right over there, for example? Like, how does that make any sense to me? Well, the idea is that when I put a center line across there, and if I draw something, I'm kind of imagining this thing that I draw as something that's bounded by a square in perspective. So I'm imagining a perspective there, and I'm kind of tracing it back to the VP, and I'm just duplicating this in my mind to create something that looks solid, right? It's a very kind of fundamental trick. I think if you want to get better at this, and if you have the Robertson book, draw a bunch or construct a bunch of things called speed shapes, and we can go over that whenever I do a lesson. Maybe this could be the next lesson, right? How to draw speed shapes. And that's basically the fundamental behind that, is just drawing curves in perspective. And I think that does help a lot. I think that might just be, if you can't do this, that might be the missing link that you need to be able to draw stuff like this. But even if you can't do curves at this point, you should still be able to do square shapes. So do more square shapes until then, if you're still having problems, and if you can't wait to learn this, the information is available in the Robertson book. Go over that in your own time. But you should still be able to do things like this, for example. You should still be able to do super kind of square shapes like that, and figure out where things are pointed, because that looks really solid, right? And this looks not as solid. So draw through, think about the center line, and then use little hints on your object, landmark hints, to kind of figure out where things are pointed, right? Because you sort of understand what the shape of something is in general, and if you don't understand what something even looks like from this one reference, just grab another reference and see what it looks like, right? If it's really kind of bothering you. And sometimes I will admit that references are not really that clear, so just grab another reference of this crab and then see what this stuff really looks like, and that'll give you better information to say, okay, well, this maybe not super cylindrical, it's more of a cube shape. So then you figure out where the landmarks are for that cube shape, and by landmarks I mean they're going to be indications. For example, for this little object over here, I can see that it's curving away from us, which means that it's pointing that way, which means that if I was drawing a cylinder on top of this, right, the cylinder wouldn't be facing us like that. It would be facing away from us like this, creating this shape. So there's always little hints, little landmark points. We just look at something and kind of figure out where it's pointed. Because again, just simplify it into a basic shape and then think about where that basic shape is pointed. That's going to be your answer. right? There's so many ways of doing this, so many ways of slicing this cake. How you break things down is up to you. But this is the way I do it personally, so it's the way I explain. So follow that idea. I try to break it down as simple as possible. And if it really is still not possible, put more practice into drawing your basic shapes and doing these kind of breakdowns. It is important, and you can do them a lot. You can do a lot of them in a small amount of time. And if you're really having problems beyond that, I think just constructing a bunch of shapes in perspective, a bunch of like organic shapes or whatever, is going to help you kind of train your eye to expect certain things. But the basic idea here that I'm kind of missing from this drawing is I think you're having a hard time looking for symmetry. So try using the centerline technique, and if that doesn't work, then we can go back to even more basic fundamentals, but it is definitely solvable. A big issue. So I spent a lot of time there. Hopefully you got some benefit out of it. So I'm going to look at your painting now. Okay, let me take a drink and then we'll look at it. Hey, how's it going, man? Again, I'm just putting this on sub-only mode just because I want to limit traffic on the channel. I just want to focus on this stuff because again, I'm not feeling too well. I just want to get this over with because I have an obligation to you guys because people submitted this week. So out. I did say I was going to do it next week, but I'm just powering through right now, so do bear with me. Okay, so for this particular one over here, we went over the drawing, so I think a lot of the problems over here would be solved in the drawing. I feel like a lot of these shapes are a little bit too flat, not too much done towards them, especially some of these are like really questionable, right? Like where are things going, why are the eyes here? I feel like a lot of this could be improved just in that drawing phase, so I think your analysis is pretty spot on. Overall, because I did look through your cubes, I did look through your cylinders, I thought those were pretty good. I don't see that much of a translation from those things to this thing. I think it's a classic case of the fact that you're really unsure about what you're doing, so it kind of erodes the result slightly, and I do think that could be improved. Let me actually confirm my suspicions here. Let me look at your cylinders. You know that you submitted after the fact and go over them. Yeah, but I think your cylindrical work, I'm not going to look at previous week's work because again there was a deadline for it. But like this is your cylindrical work over here. I mean, all of these like individually is better than this entire painting. I just think these are pretty well done, and I think let's try and keep things more closer to this over here than whatever I'm seeing over here. So if that means that you need to sacrifice a little bit of accuracy to your reference in order to draw it a bit more basic like this, do so. Because if you can convert that drawing into basic shapes, it's going to give you a better result. Because from this, besides some slight perspective issues, I think this is it's pretty well rendered. I don't have that many issues with this. This is not even close to what I see over there. So if you need to simplify it even further, draw me these shapes and then we can kind of figure out how to go further and further. Because if you can render me cylinders, then let this just be an exercise in finding cylinders and finding cubes and finding spheres on references. And then we can move on to more complex shapes, right? You could have an assignment for complex shapes, or you can do stuff on your own time. But let's get this to this level first. I think this is not too much to ask for. Because I mean, I can go over a bunch of things over here, like you're missing highlights, you're missing contrast, you're missing AO, you're missing cast shadow. We can talk about all this stuff, but I feel like all this stuff it's being done pretty well in your past submission work. So this just seems like it's an oversight to me. It just seems like either you're being overwhelmed or you're being distracted or you're not being very sure about your decisions. But I don't think it's because of a lack of fundamental, really. I think it just needs to be realigned slightly. But we can go over things just for the sake of completion. So what are my major problems with this? Everything is a little bit too washed out. There needs to be more overall contrast on the image. Let me show you what that looks like, for example. Simple idea to kind of figure out where the contrast can go in drawings is just to hit the auto contrast and then dial it back if you need to. And you can see what a dramatic difference it already makes. Everything is a lot more solid. Why does that work? It's because it's separating your lights and shadows a little bit more. I don't know how much you're respecting halfway to black over here, but it doesn't seem like it's that much. Yep, visions are basically confirmed there. so not that much respect for the halfway to black. Again, that's just a principle. I don't expect you to use it, but I do expect there to be good contrast, because that's something that we want to kind of achieve in our paintings. So even just that much, once again, work, right, improves your overall presentation. And I can spot it immediately because, again, it's not really, like, you can see the difference, right, between that and the things on the left. I'm not saying the things on the left have amazing contrast, but certainly have better contrast than that, right? So moving on further than that, some of these shapes, again, a lot of this shape stuff is ambiguous. Like I said before, I do agree with your assessment of yourself, saying that some of the drawing could be improved, it could be improved a lot. You are missing highlights all over the place, you're missing bounce light in a few of these areas. I feel like some of these things could maybe be cast a little bit better. Like this would cast on top of this would cast on top of this. Why is that just black? Why is that just black? Over there, surely there would be gradation, there would be bounce light, there would be ambient light, there would be something there. This whole side, like I'm not quite sure what's happening there, right? It seems like this is kind of coming underneath, but then the other side of it doesn't really reflect that. Like what even is this shape, right? Like let me go back to your drawing and try to figure out what the shape is. Okay, well, you weren't even sure over here, right? And that's a big problem. Like, I don't know, well, I don't have the file that I just drew over, but you kind of get the idea, right? Look for that symmetry. I think that's maybe a big thing that you're missing over here for design in general, or just for drawing in general. You're drawing kind of visual shapes, but you're not drawing what's supposed to be there, right? Because if I just simply erase this stuff, because we don't need it. If all we do over here, right, is just consider this is a little bit more solid, so I just draw a simple cylinder here. The whole drawing is improved. Because I think you're drawing too visually, you're not drawing inferentially from your reference. So you're kind of drawing what you see as opposed to what you know. That should be avoided at all costs. Right? Because that already, I feel like, even though there's a little bit ambiguity over there, at least I know what the shape is. It's solid in reality, because I can see a clear line of symmetry across that side. That's why it looks better, right? So obviously there could be like little malformations or deformations or whatever have you on this side, but I also expect it to be on this side as well. And that's what makes things look so much more real and designed, is the fact that I can see a clear line of symmetry. Because like I said, the majority of things in life have symmetry. They have a center line. I don't see that on the drawing, which is why it's getting a lot worse than it needs to be. Right, so whenever I have an object that has a clear idea of what it is, and then it just becomes crazy on the other end, this stuff is a big question mark in your drawing, because the drawing itself is a problem, and then how do you render it to save it? Well, you can't. But if I just do a simple idea here, if I just add a sense of symmetry to it, if I add any sort of symmetry to it, immediately it's improved. I can do that, like that maybe. Perspective over there. If I add that, then immediately it becomes cooler, right? It becomes something that's possible in reality. Like that maybe, and we'll just say that this truncates into a semi-cylinder. Like, look at that, look what I just did there. I just drew a simple shape, I drew a center line on top of it, and now it looks way more solid, way more possible in reality, right? And this could be a great exercise, right? One of my teachers says this oftentimes. He says he'll just draw random shapes and then try to find the center line through it. And it does really make a lot of sense to do this, right? Because it just teaches you what you really need to know. Because the second I do that, then everything starts to make a lot more sense, and as far as what I'm looking at. Everything makes way more sense. I just skin it on that side, right? But then suddenly I have something that seems like it exists over something like that, which just looks like it's unfinished. Never underestimate the power of symmetry. Okay, so center line and foreshortening are two tools, and I know you can do most of that already. Can you do it before? Consider doing it for your paintings. You'll get a better result. Okay, let's move on to the next one. We have Travis. Okie dokie, Travis. Go ahead and go through this work. My music is entirely stopped. Or is it just like a break or something? I don't think it's still there. Okay, Travis, what do you have for me? Yeah, not too bad. Some of the vertical shapes look okay. I wish you included the reference. But we can go through this. We talk about the stuff that I think could be improved. Overall perspective, yeah, not too bad. I feel like there's a little bit of a switch or tilt on this shape over here, but it's getting there. Not too disappointed. I see a little bit of drawing through there, pretty good. Some of these shapes are kind of getting pretty solid. This one over here on the back, a little bit questionable. Again, I wish you included your lines because I can spot the stuff a little bit easier. But so we were just talking about symmetry with the Tsar. So I think we can talk about symmetry with you as well as far as the drawing goes. So this sort of termination is a little bit questionable, right? So why is it terminating like that? It's a bit of a question mark in my head. So it gives me the impression that this particular shape, it starts like a semi-cylinder, like that, and then it goes into like a flat shape in the front. That's what it gives me the impression of. And it goes into like a really flat shape, which I don't know if that's entirely accurate to the reference, right? So I think I would prefer this to kind of curve similar to the cylinder, give me a much more kind of solid shape in there. I think it tapers a little bit too much. Any other drawing issues that I can spot easily? Not too many, I feel like. Overall, maybe I have an issue with the way that these feet are drawn. I think kind of simplifying them into kind of smaller cylinders, even though it's a pain in the ass to draw, I think it does kind of lead to a slightly better benefit. But let's talk about some other stuff, right? So some of this stuff is a little bit too rudimentary. You see how everything looks kind of worked, but this front kind of cube on the face doesn't really work as well? It's the reason is because it looks a little bit underworked. So what we need to include over here is a sense of gradation on the shape. So for instance, a simple idea for this particular one is just to include an idea of a bounce light, right? If that's going to be a shadow side, I can simply add an idea of a bounce light in here. Right, so I can add some idea of gradation. Maybe one more step of that. And on this side, get a light from the top, let a vertical light fall off. And we'll select that final edge over here. I'm gonna lighten up everything just to add more visual distinction between the planes. Right, to lighten up everything. And then I'll add in a gradation. There's just a couple of steps and now everything fits a lot better, right? Because it looks worked, it looks like it fits. I have this gradation on surfaces, I have bounce light, and it gets even better when I add in an idea of edges on that side, edges on this side, specular light on one side of this head, on that side maybe, depends on my fancy. But that stuff really goes a long way in making all of these kind of flatter surfaces more uniformly kind of situated on the canvas with everything else, because you don't want the flances to be flat valued. Same thing goes for back here. I think you're missing some slight ideas of ambient occlusion. All ambient occlusion means is that I am closer to you, right? I'm close to you, so therefore together we're gonna preclude the light from hitting us too much, right? So areas like this in between, do try to consider the fact that there's going to be a bit of shadow in between these areas. It does matter a lot. It's going to help you a lot with your illustration work. It's the idea that when two things are close to each other, I'm going to expect there to be a little bit of shadow in between them. And this is not really shadow per se, it's just that light is prevented from running amok the way that it usually does, right? Just because you have two objects that prevent there. So imagine this particular kind of furrow in between, like how little light's gonna get in there. That's gonna be very little light that gets in there because again you have these two huge objects on both sides. So do consider this, even in this case of the sphere, right? The sphere that's kind of settling in for the eye. If you consider this to be like a half sphere, there would still be a measure of AO on the underside of this. And this really does matter, by the way, because adding in this ambient occlusion is one of those biggest steps to get more realistic looking drawings, because it's something that people oftentimes miss. Because it's so subtle sometimes, right? So subtle that you can miss it, but if you miss it, it's very obvious. So be very careful with this kind of stuff. Push the shadow underneath there. Even that little bit helps, right? Remember, that's not really a shadow the way that we traditionally think about it, right? Nothing's blocking light in such an overt manner. It's just that there's not enough light hitting that particular area just because of the proximal objects in that particular location. Secondly, I want you to be a little bit more considerate about the bounce light here. Right over here, the bounce light and the main light are very close to each other, right? And we don't really expect this unless this is somehow a mirror that is sitting on. We know it's not, right? So understand that the bounce light is just going to be the same effect. Well, it's coming from the same source as this light, your main light. But realize that the bounce light has to travel all of this distance. It has to go from the source, it has to bounce off of the ground, and go back into my object. And while doing so, it loses a lot of energy, right? It's going to lose a bunch of energy. Some of the energy is going to be absorbed by this particular floor. Some of it's going to be scattered around. And only partial amounts are going to actually hit back. So this actually is a significant loss of energy from that major light source. So we can't have these two values be so comparable. So remember that bounce light, keep it a little bit lower, okay? It does overall help the read of the object. It prevents people from mistaking things as something else. Now perhaps this is more of a metallic object. I will give you a little bit more freedom there. But even still, I do prefer there to be more visual distinction. So just something like that, for example, it goes a long way in ensuring that everything seems a lot more rounder, a lot more believable. Same thing over here. I see the same mistake over and over again, so I think this is a big one for you to take away from this assignment. Be a lot more careful about your bounce lights. Keep them separate from your main lights. This is not, again, all these things I talk about, they're not restricted to just drawing shapes. This is for all drawing in general. Universal principle. So be a little bit more careful about that. Lighting out a bit more slower, and you see everything starts to look a little bit more natural, a little bit more understandable. Even here, I kind of get it to a certain extent, not as bad though. Be a little bit more careful about that. Some things that I want you to be a bit careful about as well, beyond that idea, is that this one is pretty bad over here. This needs to overall be darker on the bottom side for multiple reasons. Clarity. See how much that helps? That makes it look more round. I mean, I know you can do it, just remember to do it. Careful about just blowing things up with overexposed light. Be a bit more particular about the way that you light stuff. I'm not saying that there's no place for overexposed work and lighting in general, in all sorts of work, but really, what are you kind of gaining from blowing up this thing with basically a bright white light, right? So I think be a little bit careful about this. Kind of add more gradation, keep it a little bit more lower key, and then be a bit more particular with the way that you put your lights. I think it's a great thing to practice right now. It's a great thing to practice because you're practicing the art of subtlety, right? Because that doesn't look too natural. And natural, I think, is a great kind of goal to set for yourself with this kind of work, because it really kind of tests your ability to manipulate the fundamentals to the point where things are clear, but they're not like in your face clear, right? It's still believable to a certain extent. I'm gonna add some gradation there on top. And then just throw a little bit of a highlight on top if you'd like. I realize that you have a little bit of hint of color on this. I don't really mind it, but maybe grayscale will be easier to think about stuff. and maybe a bit of darkness on the other side, depending on how you want to consider the lighting. We don't really need it. We don't need to blow stuff up with overexposed lighting. Right? We can just keep things kind of medium key and be fine with it. Right? Again, bounce sounds a bit too strong here, affecting your overall roundness. I think that isn't a step in the right direction. I'm not saying that it's even close to being fixed, but it's a step in the right direction. Right? Do consider your cast shadows a bit more. So consider what's going to be casting on what. It does really help, right? So I'm not saying strongly that this eye is going to cast on the side of the face, but you can kind of make it be that way if you really care about it. If you really want to show this eye distinction between this eye and this side of the face, you could easily cast a shadow there. You could cast a shadow from this ball on top of this, not just keep it in complete shadow, but kind of keep it in partial shadow. To have an area of light exposed there so that this actually looks like a cast shadow. Very simple change to make. These cast shadows, don't underestimate them, because they really do help solidify a drawing, makes things look like they're much more real. But beyond that, I feel like that's about all I want to say for this particular drawing. So not too bad. I didn't give Azara a score, by the way. I'll give it a 4. This one's not too bad. I'll give this one a 5. Yeah, careful with the major things I want you to think about is don't overexpose stuff. Think about ambient occlusion. Major one, your bounce light. Take care of that, and your drawing's going to be a lot more improved. Speaking of drawing, be careful about stuff like this, right? Really think it out. Can you draw this in like multiple angles, for example, and then see if it really confirms your suspicion about that particular idea? Because I don't want you to just lift shapes from your reference. I want you to kind of figure out what's happening there. It really helps for overall drawing. Okay? Thanks for submitting. Let's go to the next one. We have one from Spod. Okay, let's look over it. Hi, Spod. Take a drink here. Yeah. This like syrupy sweet caramel like macchiato thing. It's killing me inside. Okay, buddy, what do you got for me? Okay, let's go with your overall drawing. Perspective, not too bad. I think the centerline talk that I had with Azar would also benefit you, especially because both of you guys are looking for concept art jobs, right? So think about centerline a little bit more. I think it's going to help a few areas. Like, I think you're a little bit further along because I like these things over here. I think that's pretty decently designed. These front claws, I see some symmetry there, but I think this is a great example of things that we can work on a little bit more. Like the centerline for the head, I think if you find that, sort of helps place things a little bit better. So where's the centerline over here? So if I just draw a line across, a line of symmetry across this, let me grab blue neon thing. Alright, maybe we'll make it. Okay, so if I draw a line across, it's there, right? There. And I can imagine a similar line across the head. So maybe that's like the shape I can look for. So this is like a cross-sectional region of the crab. Maybe it doesn't look like this, right? I think this would be a classic case where I would look for more reference to kind of really figure out what I'm looking at. I would assume that it would be a little bit less angle, so maybe that and then like that would be probably more accurate, right? I think this we can all kind of agree that it's probably closer to what's actually happening there on the crab. And then once I kind of figure out the center line, I just go boom on this side, and then again just duplicate on the other side. I can just assume that both of these things are kind of hemispherical shapes on that side and on that side. These are like rounded cones or whatever. However you want to break this down is up to you. That's one way of looking at it, right? So if I was going to draw ribs on this, ribs would look like this. These are ribs facing us. I'll draw through in a second. So that's what the overall shape would look like. It's a great exercise doing this, by the way. It really does help you figure out how good your perspective is. That would be the shapes. And I'll draw through now. Drawing through would look like this. That's what I'm looking at right now. That's how I'm picturing this whole thing. So I picture it pretty well in that kind of order. But you can also break it down a different way, right? You could also say that this is a lot more square in the front. So I'm going to give you an alternative version here. You could say that this is a lot more square in the front. Because again, I don't know what this looks like, right? I would really look for different reference here. Or look for more reference. Maybe it's square in the front and square in the back. Looks like that. And in that case, maybe I'd think about this to be more triangular. Like maybe it has a much more flatter front. Triangle like that. I draw this line in relation to this line. Keep things in order. Again, this gives it a much more prominent kind of front. So I draw a line here and then I draw through. I'll curve it a little bit. It's a drawing a bit better. This goes here. Goes here. This line again made in relationship to these two lines. I push this back. I'll draw through now. So another option. I'll shade the visible faces for you. Simple value really quickly, just so it's a bit clearer. Oh, it can be a little bit hard to see what I'm seeing here, because drawing through sometimes has that effect. Helps you as the artist, but sometimes doesn't help the viewer. So this is the front face. And then you have this bottom face here. And obviously have a face on back. But you see how that kind of gives me a much more kind of solid design than I have already here. Right? And then obviously there's another option there that I kind of showed you previously. But don't underestimate this, right? The Tenterline is super powerful. So do use it. Very powerful technique. So that's my critique for your drawing. Talk about your painting. Okay? Missing some bounce slide, right? Some free real estate here that we can really use. I see some bounce slide, but can be improved a bit more. Right? I see a little bit here, a little bit of shift, but we can go higher than that. Just to kind of add more overall roundness to our objects. I kind of play it by ear here. I'm just using a 50% brush. I'm just kind of finding a little bit more gradation. If I can squeeze it out, I'm going to squeeze it out. A bit more gradation there. It does help a lot, right? It does help kind of liven up some of these shapes a bit more. Is that something that is missing? Good job on the highlights. Remember those, not too bad. The shadow a bit one-dimensional. Remember what I said about shadow? Gonna have much more, or a little bit more at least, some variation in terms of darkness as we head closer and closer to the object, because more stuff gets ambiently occluded. Do not miss this, really important thing. So I expect that to be much more darker because it's closer, right? Obviously it's gonna be darker, closer. See how much that helps? Like, it just makes things look so much more rounded and real. Don't skip that step, it's an important step. Right? And you can even go the reverse way, right? As we go further and further away from this whole situation, shadow is going to get much more blurry. Right? We're going to get a little bit more defocusing happening there. Filter mask. So that can even add further stuff to the impact of my shadow. Okay? Going on from there, This stuff over here, I do think you can make that shape a bit more solid by just drawing it a bit better. I do appreciate the change over here, the halfway to black principle I'm assuming you're using over here, just gonna get good contrast. I do appreciate that you're doing different values, and I think it doesn't look too bad overall. Just some minor perspective issues with the symmetry that I don't approve of. I go there, for example, like where is it really coming from? I think this seems more perspectively accurate, like that. Seems like it's heading better in direction, because I'm thinking about a center line like this, right? Based on where the eyes are positioned. Be a bit more careful about that stuff. This whole disc itself, a little bit strange in the way that it's done. I think, yeah, I think it's just a drawing issue. Drawing is what's kind of giving me a little bit of a problem here. If I just fix up the drawing a little bit, I'll feel better about it. Be a bit careful about these cast shadows. Remember that this shadow over here, I mean, I don't mind the value itself, but I do want you to think more about visual distinction. I think I talked to somebody else about this. I think it was Beastonian, right, previously. But remember that all these cast shadows are not going to have the same value as far as concept art is concerned, right? Because this is a form shadow, this is a cast shadow, and this is underneath the big form shadow of the major form. So these values, even though in an illustration we can consider them to be quite similar, concept art painting, we don't want to do that because we want to have liberty of clarifying certain areas. So think about how you're going to do this, right? So you can add more ambient occlusion on this side to give this more of a darkness. You could add more darkness underneath here and say that the bounce light's not so high. You can add a little bit more lightness over here and say that's going to be ambient light. Or you just simple, just bounce light over here, bounce light or ambient light, because this is a cylinder. So something like that helps a lot, right? Because the more you kind of give up on areas like this and say it's all going to be a common shadow, even though it kind of works for illustration sometimes, for a concept style piece, think about gradiating all edges, right? Again, like I said, industrial principle right there, gradiate everything you can. So you can really, you're kind of missing out on some opportunities there to get a much stronger read and to make things look more solid by missing out on these bounce light ideas. I mean, see how much better that looks already, right? Having a little bit more bounce light there, suddenly that area gets clarified a bit more. And it helps even more if I add like something like AO over here, for example. That can help this whole idea live even more. Adding AO near the top. Like, see, everything that I do there is making this look more real, more finished, more professional. Because you can't kind of skip these fundamentals when you want to present this kind of work, right? Over here, maybe I'd add more overall gradation for this disc. So be a bit more careful about this kind of stuff, right? Don't just say it's going to be the same value and then leave it that way. You can't be that kind of lackadaisical when it comes to these paintings anymore, because the more you pay attention to these kind of things, the more weapons you have in your arsenal when you're painting something for real, right? When you're doing a full painting. Same thing over here, right? Don't do stuff like this. Remember, you have ambient occlusion there, you're going to have ambient occlusion there, it's going to separate these things out. And it shouldn't be an automatic choice to say, okay, they're going to be similar, so I'm going to paint them similar. This is a mistake that I've made for my illustration work translated to concept work. It's been pointed out to me and I've had to fix it. Don't make my mistake. Well, you have made my mistake, but don't keep making it. It lowers the quality of your work. See how much stronger that looks already? This sort of small attention to detail, it all adds up to more professional work, so don't ignore it. Right, this stuff really does matter. Same thing over here on this side, more bounce light. I feel like everything could use a little bit of tightening up. And, you know, I can easily just say, you know, who cares about this assignment? It's a bullshit ass assignment by some random guy on the internet. At the same time, this is your work, right? This is representative of you on the canvas. I asked you to do something, you did it, and this is you saying this is my best attempt at doing something. At least I hope it is, right? So I think it's really, really important to consider the fact that we could really kind of push these ideas, right? Because it does. I mean, see how much that instantly kind of improves the whole idea. Again, missing ambient occlusion there. When two objects are close to each other, please remember the fact that they're going to have more kind of proximal shadow in between. Be a bit more careful about that. I think overall, I mean, I would just have to repaint most of this for you. Not repaint, but just finish up most of this stuff for you. but I think you already know the things that I'm talking about here. Missing a little bit of highlight on these areas. Just be a little bit more thorough, okay? It does matter, man. All this stuff does matter. You might think it doesn't, right? You might think that I'm just nitpicking here, but like there's so many areas that you're missing some of these fundamentals. Like again, bonsai missing there, bonsai missing there, bit of bonsai missing over here, gradation missing over there, highlight missing over here. Like all this stuff, it really does add up. Like when you kind of finish all this stuff and be methodical about it, it leads to such a stronger result, right? So something that my AD here says is that he says he wishes that people didn't come in knowing how to paint, because a lot of people have these kind of same habits that I'm kind of pointing out to you right now, that they're able to make pretty good work because you can make pretty good work, so they become a little bit careless when it comes to being consistent with their output. So it's very better to be a rule follower and then start to break apart than to not follow the rules at all and have substandard work because of it. Okay, so consider it. I gave you some advice, the same advice I gave Azar earlier for the drawing through part, so we went over that a little bit more thoroughly on his crit, so you can feel free to borrow advice. But I did show you a few variations on how to get this particular shape, so that should be helpful for you. But thanks for submitting. I grade this overall, give this one a 5 as well. Move on to the next one. This is our last one here, by John. Right, let me grab the files here. Yeah, how's it going, Nazar? This is mainly just a video focused stream anyway. You got a 5? I think you got a 4 actually. Yeah, but this is mainly focused on video, because that's why I put it on sub only. Put this over here. But yeah, I tried to be as helpful as I could. Overall, would you? It'll be up on YouTube pretty soon. I'll do it right after I finish streaming. So, put this one over here. Grab that reference from you. Just put this in the same file, assuming you use the same file to paint. Yeah, seems like it. Okay, we can go over a few things here. The reference. First and foremost, right? Proportions have always been a little bit of an issue with your drawings. For this particular one, I think you could have spent a bit more time, especially because the shapes are so much more basic, to get this stuff a little bit closer to the reference. Like, you're not super far off, but I think some larger things are a problem. Your locals seem pretty fine, like the head to the mane, to the neck, to the upper body, that's fine. It's just that you're missing global things again, so just very similar to your portrait work. I think a problem that you have very oftentimes, especially when you kind of relax a little bit, I feel like, with your work, is that you still nail the local proportions pretty well, but a concurrent or a consistent problem is that you sort of drop the ball when it comes to global proportions. I'm gonna have to ask you to maybe zoom out a little bit more, right? Or do more kind of overall breakdowns, right? So breakdown, think about how many of these front sections makes up the entirety of the object, like just subdivide stuff. That stuff really helps. Do the ethereal moods technique of thinking about, okay, well, if I have this head, then how many heads does a horse kind of consist of? And you can say, okay, well, this is 2 heads, this is 3 heads, and this is 4 heads, so maybe it's about 4.5 heads. And that helps you keep things in relative proportions, right? Nothing's a bit too long, right? So your local proportioning is pretty okay right now, not too bad. Your global proportioning needs a lot of work. Okay, talk about your drawing now. Overall, some of these are okay. Some of these I'm going to ask you to draw through a bit more. So again, same advice that I gave to Spot and Azar, is that I do think that some of these areas over here are kind of escaping us in perspective. So I can see the top is being drawn through here, but what does this imply? This implies that everything's twisting around to create this kind of shape here. This is a very typical example of what people do to kind of escape drawing things in perspective. And I've done this a billion different times, so I'm pretty okay with saying that. So if I can see this side, and if it's a cylinder, I can also see this side, okay? That's just a given. I can also see this side. Right? So be a little bit careful about that. So I really want you to think about, if I'm going to make a decision over here, I need to be consistent about the decision over here as well. Anything goes over here. This one's done a lot better. Not too bad there. Perhaps that was just a bit of an oversight. And over here, also not too bad. I don't know if I fully agree with the breakdown, because I feel like, how is this really being pointed? Is it really being pointed that much to the side? I guess I can see the flank over here, right? So how would I break this down? Down there, 2 lines. One side on one side. There. It is pretty distorted. Right over there. Yeah, it's very kind of sheer. It's a rather like annoying perspective to deal with. Probably the way I would break that down. So I'm not gonna probably deduct too many points from me for having to deal with this fucking mess. It is quite a mess. Probably easier to just do that with a cylindrical shape like that. Cylinder across, maybe like be a bit superior. Cylinder across like that. Cylinder across here, like, and just connect the two of them there and there. I think that gets us a little bit more of the goofs there. Of course, this being the visible side, and that's probably more possible. What did you do? Yeah, similar. Maybe mine's a little bit more accurate to the reference because I just traced over it. But yeah, not too bad. We have similar ideas there. Turned pretty okay, so not too bad there. A bit of consistency issue, I feel like. Like right now we have like this weird wiggle going on, but if the overall horse is going to be angled in the same direction, I expect all these individual shapes to be angled in a similar perspective, right? So right now I think that's not really what's happening. There's a lot of like small little inconsistencies. So this is what I'm talking about in a nutshell, right? So if I have this shape pointed in this way, then a shape attached to this shape would also be pointed in a similar way. So I expect there to be, if there's going to be another block over here, right? That block would be very similar to this first block where it would follow that same kind of idea. There, there, and there. But right now I have this weird kind of twist happening over here, right? So what's up with that? This weird twist. And then this one over here, I don't really know where it's going because again, we don't see the underside of that shape. This one over here is pretty consistent. This is consistent with this, so that we have a lot of inconsistencies here. Even with the tail, right? How is it going to attach to this side if I can see this side of the tail? Surely if it was going to attach, I could only see the far side of the tail, right? So it would look more like this. I wouldn't be able to see this side. I don't know if you're drawing through there. Are you drawing through? No, you're not. So I would not be able to see the front because this has to attach to this, right? So I was going to draw a circle on top of this. The circle would look like this. Right? If I was going to draw a cylinder on top, it would look like this. Which means that I wouldn't be able to see that far side of the cylinder. Because I only see this side of the cylinder. If this is supposed to fit on top of that. Right? That's just the way that usually gets resolved. Right? So be a bit careful about that drawing. Be more consistent. Overall proportion stuff. But some of this is actually pretty nice. This is not bad. That's pretty okay. And some of it is pretty well spotted from the reference, so not too bad on the drawing. Pretty okay. Going to the painting. Yeah, okay. Some of this looks pretty solid. I feel like the ones that you drew well, you also painted well. Like I think the cube's pretty solid. Be careful about blowing this stuff out, like I said before. Gradient it out if you can. And some of this stuff, you realize why it doesn't look solid, right? Because again, you're not really obeying perspective at all. Because again, this comes from an issue with your drawing. This shape, we don't really know what it is because it just seems like it's curving in space, but it's not really occupying space too well. So for this one, for example, I would consider making a decision. So obviously the decision over here would be to say that I can see the back face on this side. So the second I do this, Let's fix the drawing slightly, it's gonna look instantly better. Suddenly I'm dealing with just a cylinder in space, as opposed to like an ambiguous shape that doesn't really exist, because there's no real symmetry. Like that immediately looks way more believable, and I haven't even graded it yet. A bit of this. That already helps, right? So make a decision. But remember that this is going to be a cylinder no matter what, right? So keep it a cylinder. There's that way, for example. A lot of little drawing issues that I can resolve here. That's a basic idea, and that's how. Very easy fix. Same thing over here, right? It's a cylinder to keep it a cylinder. Like, I don't mind you venturing into complex shapes, but I just wanted to be consistent across the board, and it wasn't. That's why when I do little changes like this, it does help the drawing. Little drawing, things like that are important. Draw through, don't be like. I feel like this is not super sloppy. The overall work is not. It's actually been gone over pretty okay, pretty decent, better than usual. So I'm happy about that. I still think there's a lot to tighten up, but I do see improvement in that regard. A bounce line here. I think bounce line could be improved across the piece. Over there. I feel like there's going to be a bit of ambiguity issues between the planes. Maybe I choose to just darken up this whole thing. Keep things pretty clear. Then add bounce light. Obviously, the question could be asked, right? Why is this so dark compared to this? The answer is, it doesn't need to be, right? This is just a simple solution, but what I probably do for a more complex, more believable drawing is add more ambient occlusion on this side, maybe add a cast shadow on this side, just whatever I need to add more visual distinction. This is like a very ham-fisted attempt at a solution. A bit of oversight here, be careful, man. Careful. I don't know if this was me or you, but careful about stuff like this, it does break your immersion to the drawing. Drawing as well could be a little bit more decisive with your strokes. Because I think some of these have been rendered okay, but the drawing does affect it a lot in terms of how good the overall product does look like. So I know that you might like looser artists in general, but this one has a limit, right? Where it starts to not do what you want it to do. Be a bit careful with the drawing. Forward a few times, practice like line or arm drawing exercises. Whatever you need to. After that I think helps. Specular, not too bad, could be improved. Being a little bit more specific about it. Overall, be careful with the contrast. I think I've pointed this out for Beastonian, but remember that this stuff is going to be evaluated against the background, so it really does help. And even my selection tool basically tells me that some things here are a little bit too close to the background value. I want you to be a bit more careful about that. I can adjust this. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to hit it with a slight gradient on the background in the efforts to make this look a little bit more clear. And that already helps. Get some overall contrast on the image. Now these kind of hidden shapes are being a little bit more evidently displayed. Could maybe push these speculars a little bit more. And of course be a bit more stronger with your bounce light if at all the shape looks a bit too flat. But you're not having the previous issue that you had where things look super underworked, so that's good. Some of the perspective down here is becoming a bit more questionable, and some of this is definitely underworked, not as much as before though. And be a bit more careful with these cylinders over here. I get the fact that it's mostly in shadow, but you don't really have the excuse to leave it flat. So first off, make a decision when it comes to the perspective again. Don't play both sides. Remember that at the end of the day, if I'm gonna see partial circle over here, I should be able to see full circle over here, right? So be conclusive, be very decisive about that. You want to make everything that you do way more three-dimensional when you do stuff like this. Okay, and then think about adding tangential lights or balance lights or whatever you need to make this look more round. I'm not saying that this should have the same kind of contrast as something that's directly in light, but it's going to have some contrast, right? You can't just leave it unfinished. Something should be done there. In this case, I usually light it from, I put 2 dim lights on both sides. I just light it tangentially. That can be one of the solutions that you use, right? And this one gets bounce light on the bottom, and then it creates a car shadow on this sphere. Some of these spheres are not too bad, actually. And again, be conclusive with your drawing over here. This stuff does add up a lot, right? Does add up a lot. So remember what this is actually supposed to look like, draw it out properly, right? And then paint it, because I know you can paint stuff. Paint it properly. Car shadow, remember the sharpness stuff? It does get sharper and darker the closer you get to these objects. That'll help you ground stuff if you want to ground stuff. So you can refer back to some of the other people that have done the assignment, and I've commented on how to do that a bit better. But overall, pretty okay. Not too bad, good improvement. I give this one a 6. Okay. Do we have any more on the Discord? No, that's it. That's the evaluation of the homework, guys. Overall, pretty good job. Thanks for doing the homework. If you are with me till this point of the video, you can submit a fully painted version of this in your original lighting scheme, if you'd like. And we can all go over that next Saturday. Otherwise, I'll make an announcement about what I plan to do for next Saturday, maybe tomorrow or later on next week. But yeah, thank you for watching. Thanks for submitting. Good work overall. And I'll catch you on the next stream, hopefully. This video will be on YouTube for everybody that's interested. I'll put the link in the Discord. Wondering. All right, but thanks for watching. Cheers.